Welcome to the Build-Aware webinar. As we start, I'd like to do Acknowledgement of Country, which will be done in language. Warami Midiga, Bujari Darabara, Nai Giara Donna Conley, Baiwu Darag Dalang, Wadarang Nurayin, Baiwu Bujari, Jajawarang Urayin, Naya Urabarang, Ji Nurayin, Baiwu Gubanga Ganaganang Ura Gurugal Yagu Barabugu Urayin, Kulan Nurua. Yamawa Gubanga, Kulan, Bujari Gamadawa Nubarigu, Didurigora, Gori Dim Darabara. I just said, hello friends, good day. I'm Donna Conley, speaking direct language to you from Wadawurrung country. I speak well of the Jajawarong people, the people who belong to the country, on whose land the Build Aware Bendigo campaign will run between the 7th to the 11th of March. I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging of the Kulin Nations people. I walk with and respect with support the Kulin Nations people in good spirits towards lateral love. Thank you for being here today. The Build Aware webinar is a joint partnership between 4 Victorian regulators: WorkSafe Victoria, Environment Protection Authority, Victorian Building Authority and Energy Safe Victoria. Today you will hear from a speaker from each of these regulators, and at the end we'll have time for questions for the panel. We are going to be using a platform called Slido for our questioning. You can pop your questions in this platform at any time during the presentation and we can answer them at the end. To use Slido, head to the URL on the screen at the moment and enter the meeting code. We'll remind you of this process in the question time as well. We'll begin with a presentation from Brian Chamberlain, who is a Construction Education Officer. Brian will provide an overview of WorkSafe's strategy and how they plan to ensure you keep workers safe on site. I'll hand over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Donna. So my camera and my microphone on. Welcome everybody. Great to be here. The Build Aware webinar, which has been a great event over the past. I've had a bit to do with it, so it's always a good thing to be a part of. I guess from a WorkSafe point of view, what I'm going to talk about this morning on the slide in front of you is just about how sort of WorkSafe are looking at strategizing their construction program, I guess, to look at some of the main areas of harm and the things that we see that are a major issue to us. Probably the 4 main things that we do see, which I'll get into in a minute, don't really change. So what we're looking at is what we call main priority harm areas and priority health harm areas. So as you can see from the slide in front, there's 4 main subsectors that WorkSafe construction program we'll be looking at, which is your civil and infrastructure. So there's a lot of obviously civil works going on, new estates, those type of things, greenfield estates, those type of areas that are going on throughout Melbourne, throughout regional Victoria and so forth. So there's a lot of works that go on in those. Commercial sector obviously has been booming as well. So there's a lot of commercial work that goes on. The housing projects obviously as well. There's plenty of housing going on out there as well. Again, once those civil estates and those new estates become those housing developments, there's plenty of works there. And then obviously the demolition, which includes knockdown rebuilds in built up areas, suburban areas as well. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff going on too. When we look at the priority harm areas, the 4 main, I guess, causes of fatalities in construction from our point of view that we see are number 1, falls, number 2, electrocution, number 3, being struck by a mobile plant, and then also 2, we have structural collapse on there as well. So looking at the priority harms, when we look at the civil area, we've got the trenching there, which does include falls, so falls into trenches, working around mobile plant, which is one of those things I just mentioned. Electricity as well comes in under the civil. And then obviously the traffic management by mobile plants. So those sort of 5 areas down there. The one that I did mention there was the lifting of loads. So obviously that, slinging loads with excavators, if we do have cranes around and things like that. So a lot of movement of plant causes a lot of problems for us. So they're when it comes to those civil projects, the things and the targeted areas that our inspectors will be coming on and asking questions about the duty holders, how they're going to manage those type of risks when they're out on site. The commercial area, again, number one, falls. Then we break it down again into that commercial space, into scaffolds. We see a lot of scaffolds. Obviously, the formwork. Formwork could also be included into that structural collapse that I mentioned earlier as well area. Obviously, a lot of formwork decks we've seen in the past that have collapsed. Sometimes it might only be a small deck. If there's a design for a large deck, generally they're done to plan. If there's a smaller deck, then a lot of times they might be a bit ad hoc, which can cause issues. Ladders obviously is one of the key things as well. Falling objects coming off buildings, again, the electrical side of things, and again, that movement of powered mobile plant on site, so boom lifts, scissor lifts, that type of stuff as well when we get to that commercial space. The housing area, again, falls. One of the things that we do know is a lot of our fatalities are, around in that housing space, that domestic space. We've got mentioned there are voids and edges, so edge protection, stair void platforms, those type of things, which need to be in, making sure that they are in place in builds. Obviously, falls from roofs, and again, ladders. So, ladders are another one of those key things that we're targeting all the time. And that structural collapse of late, we've had quite a few issues with structural collapse. Our engineering department been called out to quite a few framing mishaps. So when I say framing mishaps, if you like, there could be posi struts, floor joist systems that have been loaded up, may not have been finished, may not have been completed, blocked out, brackets on, beams temporarily supported with timber underneath and so forth, loaded up with sheet flooring, point loaded with more weight than what they're designed to carry, and they've collapsed. A lot of times, people are lucky to get away. Sometimes with minor injuries. We've also had some trusses that have collapsed, and sometimes those structural collapses lead to that falls as well. So there may be someone working at height, putting up some trusses or putting up some floor joists, and the reason that they have fallen is because something hasn't been braced properly, so it's led to that fall. And obviously too, the electrical is still in there. You can see down the bottom there that supervision. Supervision becomes one of those issues in those sort of areas to make sure that things are done right. Supervision of certain points in builds to make sure that we'll be covering off on questions around how do you make sure these things are done properly. How do you make sure that you know what your trades are doing when trusses are being delivered, when flooring's being delivered, those type of things. They're the sorts of questions that you should be sort of asking yourself as builders, as duty holders, to make sure, how do we look after young workers on site, those type of things, and supervise to make sure that they're there. If a group of tradies, you could have a group of chippies or carpenters that are leaving, a couple of apprentices working on site. How are they supervised? How are you making sure that they're doing the right things, that they're safe? So there's a lot of questions that will be asked around those sort of areas. And then I guess we move into that demolition. Again, there's that working at heights issue as well. Again, the falling object issue when we're pulling things down, knocking brick walls down, those type of things, throwing roofs down. Again, there's the electrical, making sure that we've isolated power, got rid of the power, and obviously too, there's that structural collapse issue with that as well. The priority health harms, also, so obviously things that cause long-term health effects as well, and that we've seen in the past. That's come up on our radar and been there for a little while now, but the crystalline silica exposure, and that comes across in all of those subsectors. So, we talk about stone masons and stone bench tops, engineered stone and things like that, but we still have that silica exposure in other areas as well, whether it's, in the civil, pushing dirt around, excavation work. In the commercial, it could be grinding concrete, it could be claddings, those type of things, and the same in the housing. And then obviously in the demolition, we've still got that silica issue when we are knocking apart concrete, breaking it up, the dust that's brought up from that. And then also too, obviously we have that asbestos exposure, which, the old asbestos is just not going away. It's always out there. It's prevalent again. There is a lot of demolition work going on, a lot of knockdown rebuilds in older areas. So it's something that keeps bobbing up. So, and out in regional Victoria too, there's a lot of properties out there that contain asbestos as well. So our main, I guess that's how we're breaking it up, those main priority harms and the priority health areas, and then into those 4 subsectors that we will be sort of focusing on. And also too, doing our job as per usual and looking at all the other things that we normally would. But they are our main sort of target areas. Just the next, moving on from that, the next slide, Allo, if I can, is just around what we call our campaigns or our media campaigns that we've put out of late. The first one, which we've done a lot of work on over the years to get this up and running, we've finally got it out there, but is our trenching campaign, which basically just talks about the fact that, are we, when we are digging trenches, are we digging, as it says there, digging a trench or a death trap? One of the key things that we find out in the industry, I do a lot of work through, the TAFE space, through, presentations through industry and that with people that work in sort of this industry as well, licensing groups, plumbers. And one of the key things we find is that, a lot of people have that mindset that we don't have to put things in place or control the risk of an engulfment until we get over 1.5 metres deep. But the fact is, you know, whenever there is the possibility of engulfment, regardless of the depth of the trench, that risk needs to be controlled. And if that means benching, battering, putting trench shields in place, then that's what we need to do. When we talk about the depth of a trench at a metre, if we've got our soil built up on the side, all of a sudden that could be 1,500 high. And most of the time when we're working in trenches, we're not working in the top of it. We're not standing up. We're working in the bottom of it, as this bloke is in this poster. So all of a sudden we've got someone bending down in a trench, below shoulder height with maybe a cubic metre of soil hanging over the top of them, which could weigh anywhere from a tonne to a tonne and a half. I was in a group yesterday with some plumbers, and 2 or 3 16, 17-year-old first year apprentice plumbers telling me that they were left alone in trenches cleaning out while the boss, shot off to do something else. One of them even said to me he was left in the afternoon in a 3.5 metre deep trench. He spent 10 metres in it, 10 minutes, and he just got out and he said, "No, I'm not doing it," went home, which is great to hear. But from that other point of view, it's not really good to be hearing that it's continually happening. And these guys are, just because they're not that, as I say, that 1.5 metre deep, we think that they're safe. The other thing with engulfment around trenching works is that anywhere where there is that possibility of engulfment is an emergency procedure. So making sure that if something was to go wrong, somebody can be rescued. So it's very important. There is some information out on our website. There's a link down there too, which goes into some new sort of animation, some new information that we've put out as well, talking about that depth of trenches and controls that can be put in place. So that if you jump on our website and have a look at that, you'll find some good information. The other one is obviously number one in our industry, falls. We just can't keep getting the message out there enough. And I think one of the key things for this is that we're not talking about, 6, 8, 9 metres in the air. We're talking from ladders. We're talking from heights, less than 3 metres, less than 4 metres. Lower heights is generally what we're working at most of the time. And when we are working at those lower heights, a lot of times we're not putting controls in place. We're working off ladders. We're leaning out to the side. We're not taking the right precautions that we should be, or working to the highest standards that we could be when we're working with heights. Again, yesterday working with some young apprentices around, fall protection and using harnesses on single-story roofs and things like that. When we start to say to them, the height of that they're working at, if they were to fall off a single-story roof, average height around 3 metres with a harness on, generally they're going to hit the ground. So, the time it takes the money it costs to have a guardrail system and the time it takes to install it, for us, it's a no-brainer. That's our expectation. Highest level of control wherever possible, guardrails, those type of things. Platform ladders where possible. If it's not a platform ladder, the appropriate ladder for the job, making sure that we work through and we pick out the right ladder for the job. Now, when we get up higher, making sure that our fall protection's in place, our hanging bracket scaffolds, our guardrails, making sure our safety mesh is fixed off properly if we're on a larger project where that is. no-go zones, all those type of things are all in place. And as it says there, high standards. Just take that time to put the right things in place. Again, more information on our website if need be, and hopefully you'll see those around and change some mindset. As I said, Donna said earlier, if there are any questions, get on the Slido and we can answer them for you later. Back to you, Donna. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Next, we'll hear from Dave Clark and Barry Hayward from Energy Safe Victoria. They'll be presenting on how you can manage people and mobile plant working near overhead and underground electrical assets to meet your legal obligations. I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Sorry, it's Barry, Donna, that's presenting.
Sorry.
Good,
Sorry,
it's
Barry.
okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Build Aware webinar. Thanks, Brian, for your presentation. Energy Safe Victoria, who is ESV? As you can see there, Energy Safe Victoria is the state's regulator for electricity, gas and pipelines. We're an independent government agency responsible for the safe generation, supply and use of electricity, gas and pipelines. And our role is to ensure Victorian gas and electricity industries are safe and meet community expectations. So we were established back in 2005, bringing those entities together. So from the electrical, it was the Office of the Chief Electrical Inspector, the plumbing industry, and also pipelines. So when you think of pipelines, it's the refineries, gas, and oil. And we also regulate the traction industry with stray currents and how they affect pipelines as well. So our role, when we say our role is to ensure Victoria's gas and industries are safe and meet community expectations. So essentially, Energy Safe is there to protect the community, the people who work on those networks, whether it be gas or electricity or pipelines, and people who work in the vicinity of electrical assets, gas assets and pipelines, and how do we protect them, or how do we ensure that they're safe? Similarly to WorkSafe, we're not so much as an OH&S regulator as we are a regulator for those technical areas. So how do we do that? We will work in with other regulators. So we do have memorandums of understanding with the likes of WorkSafe. So we'll share information where there's an OH&S incident that involves electrical infrastructure or gas at a workplace. We will work hand in glove to come to the safety outcomes, or maybe that would be through education or prosecution or the like. So how do we ensure that those industries that I spoke about comply? So we have an audit regime. We will audit the gas companies and electricity companies for the likes of Multinet or the likes of AusNet and Powercore and the other power companies. Will have an auditing regime that we hold them to account, and by way of how they meet that, they'll present safety cases to ESV or an electricity safety management scheme, which involves us when they present those to us or submit them under regulation. We will validate them and audit to them and making sure that they are doing what they say they're doing. We will also conduct field audits on those companies and the like to ensure that what they're telling us on one hand, from a bow tie type situation, on the left side, their systems and processes meets the outcome side. So they actually are managing their network safely to protect the community. I didn't also fail to mention in there that we also have an obligation to protect the community from bushfire and wildfire. And that's the way we do that is we have a vegetation team here, and the companies have to put in electric line clearance plans and bushfire mitigation plans. And they are also submitted to us for auditing and compliance. And that will also involve audits of that. So that's the things like, excuse me, the things like Black Saturday and the like is from a Royal Commission, we are bound to by those outcomes in the Commission to adhere to those, make sure the community is protected and adhere to those. So we also provide education to the industry. So we will go out to the likes of companies that work in and around power lines and provide education, whether that be via on-site, through incidents that are submitted to some civil companies. We'll also disseminate and have campaigns. So you might have seen the Look Up and Live campaign, Look Before You Cook, Negative Gas Pressure and Carbon Monoxide. They're all campaigns similar to what WorkSafe will run, that we educate the community holistically, and then we can draw that down to companies that require the information. The slide you're looking at now, that gives you a synopsis with when it comes to the build aware, what we typically look at and see. So you can see we were involved with Build Aware since 2018 from its inception, and this is its 4th year. From that slide, you can see that there's been, in that period, you can see that there's been 465 overhead incidents compared to 340 underground incidents. From those incidents, you can see where down the bottom there, they involve mobile plant. So what do we mean with mobile plant? We're talking about the likes of tippers, concrete pumps, cranes, forklifts, anything that works in and around power lines. That's what mobile plant is. Then we look at the actual building clearances, and then we have the human clearance. So that'd be people working off roofs and scaffolds and the like. And you can see the stats there from 2018 to 2021. Obviously, there's no stats for 22 at the moment. If we go up to death and injuries by year, you can see since 2018, there's been 5 fatalities in the industry, in the building industry. 7 serious injuries that would be considering of burns and electrocution requiring hospitalisation. And that could be something that's received in a high voltage electric shock that would be that could be burnt severely and would be in the Alfred for a period of time on life support. So that's excuse me. So you can see there, we've had 2 in 18, 2 in 19 when it comes to fatalities, 1 in 2020 and none in 2021. But if we look at what the in the far right hand side, you can see what was the contact made with, and by far the most common is a backhoe excavator type. So 381. So the most high consequence pieces of backhoe excavations, hand tools, tip trucks being the main areas of contacting electrical infrastructure. Excuse me. So they're the 3 main areas that we look at, or that were received in that period. So when we look at that, can you go to the next slide, please, Donna? Okay, so how do we peel that back to the Build Aware campaign? So our involvement in the campaign is, look, we will attend the sites in the Bendigo area when we're up there next week. So we'll attend the sites and we'll look for compliance and how you've considered whether you're using mobile planar scaffold, and how you've considered the electrical infrastructure, whether it be overhead or underground, and what you've put in place. So we're looking for things like, have you required spotters? Have you considered where you're going to be drop-offs for vehicles and trusses and the like? So it's all about your site setup. So we'll be looking at that, and how far away you are working from the overhead electrical infrastructure, whether you've needed to go to the power company, which will be Powercore in the Bendigo area and surrounding area, whether you've gone to Powercore for a permit to work because you are working too close, and have you considered that. We'll also provide education around around the electrical infrastructure. We'll provide you with the information you need to know how to comply. We'll have site talks and provide education. We'll disseminate stickers and the like to tell you what some of those distances are. We have a suite of stickers and pamphlets and that we can disseminate when we turn up the site. We'll also check your compliance to the no-go zone rules. So that's where I was specifically talking before around whether you are working within 6.4 of an overhead electrical asset, and that if you're going to go closer, whether you've got a spotter in place, and then if you have to come under 3 meters and under, whether you have gone to the power company for a permit to work. So we will also working with other regulators, so we could turn up to site also as a part of our a part of it, and we'll be either in teams with other regulators, or if we find something that may be of an issue to another regulator like the VBA or WorkSafe as an example, we will also liaise with them to come to site and educate or help you address your issues. The main things we see just while we're at site. So what are we looking at? So some of the things that tells us from our data from the previous slide is that people don't consider concrete pumps, where they're going to set up, how close they're going to set up to an overhead asset, how close they are to the electrical overhead asset. Delivery trucks specifically, we get a lot of spate of delivery trucks delivering trusses for those buildings or concrete panels, and they haven't looked up and lived and gone, okay, I just need to dump these trusses close to the work site that the tradies want it for, the chippies want it for, to make it easy for them. However, in that process, they haven't looked up and thought, oh, there's a power line asset there, I can't deliver, I need to set up. If they can't get a spotter to help them, or a part of that, because they'll be going to a number of sites throughout the day and they may not know what's there when they arrive, then they need to look at possibly setting up or dropping that delivery off at another point on the site. May not be practical for the tradies, but it may prevent harm or injury to the operator. So it all comes down to planning. Again, if we turn up to a site where there's scaffold, there's the consideration that they haven't taken into account how close they can get to the electrical asset, and whether they've got controls in place like hoarding and protection for the workers that work off the scaffold. So that's where we see that hand tools one, where they've been working off scaffolds and the like, and they've come too close, or they're working in around an underground asset, and they've put a saber saw or reciprocating saw into the cable, or they haven't taken into account what's under the ground. So they're the things that we'll look for and we'll discuss with the people on site. And I think the last one on that slide is that the TAFE talks will work in with the Build Aware campaign and the likes of WorkSafe, and we'll attend TAFE and provide education to electricians, plumbers and chippies at the TAFE in and around Bendigo while we're up there, and hopefully educate them at a young age what to look for and the dangers that are out there. I think I've covered most of it. I think the other thing that pops up that we constantly see on site is that builders haven't taken, when they've finally constructed in that the final wall closest to the power line, they've come too close, and it isn't until someone turns up on site and says you've built too close to the power line, and then it comes into a negotiation with the asset owner, in this case being Powercore, to relocate that. So you don't want to get to a stage where you've designed your building or you constructed your building and you've got to the last part and you've built too close, and then you're in a situation where you have to negotiate with the asset owner as to what the best outcome would be. I think that pretty much covers it. As Brian previously said, if you have any questions, please put them in the link provided, and I'll do the best to answer those questions. If we can't get to them all, I'm sure they'll be emailed and we can address that at a later date specifically. Back to you, Donna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Next up, we've got Alex Golubowski, Team Leader from Inspection Services, and Glenn Wilson, Team Leader from Inspection Services, about the Victorian Building Authority's Proactive Inspection Program. I'll hand over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Donna. Good morning, all. My name's Alex Golubowski. I'm one of the team leaders in the Audits Inspections team at the VBA. I'll be talking about the VBA's Proactive Inspections Program and specifically building-related matters. The VBA launched its Proactive Inspections Program in late 2015. It involves checking building and plumbing works under construction prior to occupation taking place. By inspecting buildings under construction, the VBA can address significant failures earlier, allowing solutions to be implemented quickly and cost effectively. The inspections are undertaken by registered building inspectors, building surveyors and licensed plumbers that conduct these inspections throughout Victoria, engaging with all practitioners and enforcing compliance with the Building Act 93, Building Regulations 2018 and Plumbing Regulations 2018. The team undertakes a large volume of inspections, both domestic and commercial sites. who typically inspect over 1,000 sites each month. The VBA's goal is to inspect 10% of all building permits issued in Victoria, and this is in line with the Victorian Minister's Statement of Expectations. In terms of how we select sites, sites are selected using a number of different methods. One is building permit data, with a focus on buildings that are intended for human occupation, also greater than 2 stories and a high cost of work as well. Another is intelligence-based selections, which typically involves targeted inspections of practitioners of interest or sites of interest. And another method is also ad hoc inspections that we do, which inspectors use flexibility to inspect sites that come to their attention while attending other predetermined sites as well. When we are on site, inspectors use a risk rating scale to determine the level of scrutiny he places over a potential issue. The scale considers the potential adverse effects on the future safety of building occupants, people nearby, and on the amenity of the building itself. If you can go to the next slide, please, Donna. In terms of where we inspect and visit, we visit all areas of Victoria, including rural and regional areas. This map shows where we've been over the past 12 months, which the VBA aims to inspect all regions of Victoria over a 3-year period. A snapshot of the top non-compliances we find is on this slide, which is from the most recent Proactive Inspections Quarterly Report, October to December 2021, and timber framing and wet areas are consistently high, as is roof plumbing. The VBA, the full report, which details what we observe on building sites, can be found in this quarterly report on the VBA's website. But for the rest of the presentation, I'll take you through some sample of building issues we observe on site, and then my colleague Glenn Wilson will also take you through issues with roof plumbing systems that we find on site as well. So next slide, please, Donna. So here we have compliance risks that we find in wet areas in residential construction. We have water stops not installed across floor openings in wet areas, and wall and floor junctions not waterproofed. So the photo to the left, obviously the wall and floor junction hasn't been waterproofed as per AS 3740. And a common one that we find is the photo to the right, which you don't have the water stop across the floor opening as per AS 3740. Next slide, please, Donna. Here we have compliance risks found in fire separation. The compliance risks we find construction of fire separating walls not constructed as per the manufacturer's requirements and the tested system. So your shaft liner panels damaged, lack of mineral wall installed at external intersections, gaps not maintained between the frame and the shaft liner, wall clips that are nailed and not screwed, and wall clips only installed to one side of the shaft liner. We also find EPS, external walls crossing a fire separating wall, and also plumbing and electrical services running within the shaft liner cavity. So in your photos, the one to the left, just not most systems require 20 to 40 mil gap between the actual shaft liner and the actual frame. The second photo there's got your shaft liner damage for installation of services. The third photo, the L brackets not connected, only on one side of the wall, and also your separating wall between 2 dwellings crossed by combustible building element. Next photo, please, Donna. Yep. So we also have we find risk with relating to timber framing. The common ones we find are penetrations through top plates greater than 25 mil that are common risk. The shear blocks missing to non-load bearing brace walls, and bottom plates overhanging the slab block greater than 10 mil. Next photo, please, Donna. Thank you. With footing and slab construction, we tend to find exposed steel with an inadequate concrete cover, as per the photos there to the left. And we've also got bricks overhanging the slab or the slab rebate by greater than 15 mil, and also slab cutouts to alter plumbing locations or carry out alterations to the services, as the photo on the right. Next slide, please, Donna. So in relation to commercial items with fines, with regards to fire resistance, we come across unprotected surface penetrations through firewalls, unprotected openings within 3 metres of side or rear boundary, and timber framing used in walls required to be non-combustible. So in the photos, the photo to the left having a timber bottom plate in a wall required to be non-combustible. The middle photo having a opening within 3 metres of side boundary, but the wing wall, in this case, stopping short from the front boundary, and your unprotected service penetrations through firewalls as well. Next photo, please, Donna. Yeah, with regards to access for people with a disability, some of the more common risks we find relate to non-compliant circulation space at doorways, and your minimum 30% luminance contrast between toilet seat and pan as per 1428. Next slide, please, Donna. Finishing off with damp and weatherproofing, some of the risks we find: bathroom floors not graded to the floor waste, no floor waste provided in urinal areas, and balcony finished floor levels being higher than the apartment finished floor level. So your photo to the left there, floors to bathrooms of SAUs don't have the fall to the floor waste as per F111 of the NCC 2019 Volume 1. The next photo shows no floor waste provided to a wall-hung urinal as per Part F17D of the NCC 2019 Volume 1. And your last set of 2 photos there showing the balcony finished floor level constructed higher than the apartment finished floor level, which in this case, the approved plans required the apartment finished floor level to be 100 mil higher than the balcony finished floor level, but on site was 30 mil the other way around. So I'll pass over to Glenn Wilson, who will now go over the plumbing risk we find.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, and good morning, everyone. I'll be speaking this morning on behalf of Proactive Inspections for Plumbing, and wanted to give you 5 examples of some of the issues our inspectors are finding when they think, and how we think that they could be addressed through industry, particularly with roofing. The top 5 issues being rain head overflow provisions, downpipe spreaders, change of direction in box gutters, box gutter supports, and discharge of valley gutters. Non-compliance to plumbing standards in all classes of plumbing is an ongoing issue for our trade. And whilst we're seeing significant improvements to achieving compliance and reducing risk for property owners and occupiers, particularly in the sanitary plumbing, unfortunately the same can't be said for roofing. Roofing has been identified as having a highest proportion of non-compliance in comparison to all other classes. And proactive inspections and plumbing compliance audits through 2020 and 2021 identified design, installation and interpretation of standards for roofing compliance all contribute to the problem. This means that for us designers, building and plumbing practitioners need to work collaboratively to fix the problem and achieve results that satisfies all parties involved in the construction process. With this in mind, we believe roof drainage and cladding installations present challenges to both, and I would like to share with you the top 5 non-compliances that are consistently encountered on building sites. Some of these items should be a relatively easy rectification considering they are installed at later stages of the development. However, others will require a collaborative approach to achieve compliance by deemed to satisfy by building designers and building and plumbing practitioners. Next slide, please, Donna. So the example here being insufficient overflow provisions to rain heads. Yes, the examples here both have overflow provision provided. It can be asked though, are they appropriately sized to connect the downpipe? The overflow provision being to protect the building from water ingress should the downpipe become blocked. Next slide, please. Downpipe spreaders not installed in an approved manner. So we have two examples here where on the left we have a downpipe spreader that's discharging into a box gutter. It isn't directly to the sump or rain head, and it can be said that it could be impeding the water flow within that box gutter. The other example is a downpipe spreader which is discharging onto a flashing, again, which could result in water ingress into a building. Next slide, please. Change of direction in box gutters. In all instances, box gutters need to be straight and without change of direction to discharge. All box gutters must discharge through a sump or rain head and at the downstream discharge point without change of direction, i.e. not to the side. Next slide, please. Box gutter supports. Box gutter support systems need to be designed and manufactured to support the weight of the gutter, and in particular if it is full of water or if it's to provide support for a trafficable load, so if people are to walk within it. Supports are to be compatible materials to the gutter. That means that what we are seeing, and you can see an example on the right, some products including treated pine and particle board contain chemicals, that can be corrosive to the metal box gutter if in direct contact. These materials shouldn't be used, but if they are, a non-abrasive, impervious, non-conducting material must be used between the two surfaces to prevent that corrosion. And lastly, thank you, Donna, for the last slide. Valley gutters are not discharging into eaves or box gutters. As you can see in these two examples, we've got valley gutters which are discharging into a wall. They are then discharging via a flashing to the eave or box gutters. All valley gutters must discharge directly to a box gutter. These are 5 real examples of non-conformances that we are encountering weekly. And whilst it is the responsibility of the licensed plumbing practitioner who is certifying the installations to ensure that it's compliant to all relevant standards, what we would ask is, can building designers, building practitioners work with plumbing practitioners to ensure compliance can be achieved at the planning stage? And this will hopefully avoid any potential risk for building owners and occupiers now and into the future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Alex and Glenn. Now to our final presentation. Mark Bennister, Manager of Waste and Land Policy and Regulation, will present an overview of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, to understand about your lawful place and waste duties. I'll hand over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks for having me this morning to talk about environment protection laws and new laws, particularly around waste. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the EPA, so we're in Victoria's environmental regulator, and we work to prevent the harmful effects of pollution and waste on human health and the environment. So part of our role is working with community, business and industry, people such as yourselves, to understand the obligations under the laws. Today, look, I just wanted to provide some guidance, particularly around the management of waste. It is a big part of what EPA regulates. But just firstly, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the new laws that were introduced on the 1st of July last year. So we're 9 months in now, so they're still relatively new, which have provided us the enhanced powers to prevent risks to human health and the environment. So I guess similar to the OH&S approach, we now have the General Environmental Duty, or also known as the GED. Look, it's a centrepiece, I guess, of the new environmental legislation, and it applies to all Victorians. So if you're conducting an activity that poses a risk to human health and the environment, you need to understand how to manage those risks and reduce any harms that could arise from your activities. So the expectation is that you'll manage your activities to avoid that risk, rather than EPA coming along after pollution has occurred, which has been a feature of the older frameworks, I guess. In addition, there's specific waste duties. So the general environmental duty works well when you're undertaking an activity, but waste changes hands. So we need to have waste duties that cover the whole supply chain. And at some point, you're all producers of waste, and you need to understand what type of waste you've got and where it can be taken. And I think we've all seen in the news, they've been seeing some pretty high profile incidents involving waste facilities in recent years. And we just want to make sure that this isn't happening again and again, and that all parties understand and think about what's happening with their waste. So I guess increased penalties come along with the introduction of the new act. So it's much more difficult to intentionally incorporate the cost of doing the wrong thing into the cost of doing business. So we just want to make sure that everyone is thinking about waste management and how they're going about it. So what are the waste duties? You'll see the diagram there at the top outlines the kind of general chain of events, which can be repeated over and over again, but the general chain of events involved in managing your waste. So the waste duties, again, managing that supply chain. Everyone involved in the waste supply chain has a duty now. So producers, transporters, receivers all have certain obligations that exist beyond when you let go of the waste. So when you relinquish management or control with that waste, you've got to make sure you set yourself up to comply with those duties. So this means those who deposit industrial waste must only do so at a place that's authorised to receive the industrial waste. Equally, receivers of industrial waste, say landfills, for example, must also be authorised to do so. But finally, the producers, and many of you will be in this position, producers of industrial waste must also take all reasonable steps to classify that waste and provide any information to the transporter that might be relevant about the waste and where it's going, and take all reasonable steps to ensure that it's managed and at a place that's authorised to receive it. We shortcut the authorised to receive it to be called lawful place, and that's what you see in the diagram there. So transporters also have a duty to ensure that waste has been taken to the lawful place. So it's important that any transport contractors, subcontractors, all have the information they need to ensure that they know what they're carrying and they know where to get it to. Transporters also have that obligation to check that the place that they are going to isn't just the local park or field, or to make sure that it is actually authorised to receive that waste and the people agree. The next slide, thanks, Donna. So let's say you're on a site, you've done a job, you've generated a lot of waste. You need to manage that waste in order to complete the job. So how are you going to go about that? So firstly, you need to identify and classify the waste. Now, there's plenty of information on our website, but I would say also in the back of the regulations, if you do open it up, there is a large table of all the different types of waste and their relevant classification. So that classification tells you whether you need a license or tracking, or whether you just need to consider getting it to a permission facility, and I'll run through that in a moment. So you'll have several different materials, no doubt, to deal with, and you need to remember that each load needs to be handled in line with the most hazardous type of waste in the load. So let's say you do have asbestos appropriately managed and wrapped in that load, you'll need to track it and get it to the landfill. But where it's safe to do so, it's always better to plan ahead, separate materials. Not only does it aid in the ability to recycle different items, but it also ensures that you're not having to track and send all of your materials to the one type of lawful place. So in the case of asbestos, you only need, you have to get that to the landfill as soon as you can. So on complex jobs, where, for example, where contaminated sites might be involved, just to give an example, you might wish to engage what we call an accredited consignor. So an accredited consigner is someone that EPA appoints to support waste producers to meet their waste duties. And ideally you engage this person as a consultant early on so they can manage and classify different types of waste, particularly if you're dealing with the more hazardous or what we call reportable priority waste or priority waste. And they can also, the added benefit of accredited consigners is they can also create waste records and track waste, particularly if you're dealing with something like contaminated soil. You might need to track, or even asbestos for that matter, if you've got large amounts. You can use these accredited consigners to manage your waste tracking as well. So there's some benefit there. So that's a new function that we've introduced recently, and we hope the uptake of that will help you classify your waste. I guess once the waste is being classified, the person in management or control of the waste must take all reasonable steps to ensure it gets to that lawful place. So this is a critical duty for the producers and something that is quite new. The transporter also needs to, as I've mentioned before, that transporter also needs to understand where it's going. But how do you go about determining whether a site is lawful or not? I guess there's multiple ways of establishing that. So generally we do that through what EPA calls a permission. And I'll run you through an example. So if you engage someone as a skip bin operator, it's always worth checking if they have the permission. We have a public register which outlines all the permissions, and check that they are permissioned, or the site that they're taking it to is permissioned. Now they may not always use a third-party site. They might take it straight to landfill, but it's important to ask that question. So generally, EPA will use permissions to highlight what is a lawful place and what is not. Some of these permissions authorise you to receive specific types of waste. If a site has a permission to receive such waste, then it's the permissions will match and the lawful place is complete. So again, make sure you search for that for the correct permission. And again, landfills, as you probably be aware of with asbestos and so on, certain landfills will contain, you'll have certain permissions to take different types of waste. Asbestos is the most common one. Not all of the landfills are licensed to accept it. A lot of them are. So when you're dealing with chemicals and paints and other things, it's also important to check, some of those can't go to landfill. So it's always important to check where you're taking it to is actually licensed to receive it. So when you contract a removalist to come and pick up the waste, or a waste company, it's important you're having those conversations around what is happening to the waste. Don't ignore it. Don't just take the cheapest quote. Ask questions of your provider to see if they're registered to transport the waste, and cross-check that on the permissions register. So what I mean by that is if you have, if they haven't provided you with the information about what permissions they have and where it's going to be received, just cross-check that on the public register if you can. So again, there's a bit of that planning ahead. Do they actually have that registration or permission with EPA? Does the place the waste is being transported need to have an EPA license? So licenses again for the highest risk materials, and are they authorised to receive that waste? So you could incorporate, and it's a good way of doing this is to incorporate this into your documentation and workflow. Getting this information when you receive a quote is probably ideal. So before you're actually dealing with the waste and you have to stop the waste being moved because you're feeling uncomfortable about where it's going. So follow up with the contractor as well. Make sure that waste has made it, because not every company is doing things lawfully, and it's important just to do that follow up. Receipts, of course, are a good way to do this, and that will no doubt be part of your document and workflow management when you're setting up a job and you need to manage your waste. So check that, and also insist that that shows where the waste is being taken to. In certain circumstances, you may want to transfer waste. So this is from one job to another. So this is where you might want to use reuse some types of material, say, you know, maybe bricks or timber and so on. For transfer over of around 5 cubic meters or less at a time, you don't need to establish lawful place. So I'll just put out there, it's kind of the ute load or the trailer load of bricks and timber. You don't need to do anything to establish lawful place, provided you're using that material. For larger transfers, we have what's called a declaration of use. So this is where you want to use the material at another site is going directly into another use. It's not being reprocessed or managed in any way. It's going straight from timber from one place into a building somewhere else. You can use declarations of use for the larger transfers. There's good information about that on the EPA website. It is a quick and easy thing to do, but does require sign off from both parties. Not submitted to EPA, this declaration. It's something you keep on your books. If, you know, should an authorised officer come out and question why waste is on a site, you'll be able to establish how you were using it, what you were using it for, and the form sets you up to do that. The consequences of non-compliance. So as I mentioned earlier, the penalties have increased quite a bit. The Act has been completely modernised. They're now, you know, 360,000 for an individual, or up to 1.8 million for a body corporate in fines and penalties if you're found to be doing the wrong thing. And where aggregated breaches have occurred, I believe that's up to 3 million as well, just over 3 million. If someone, so to deter, I guess in the past, we've seen that sometimes gets built into the cost of doing business for your outright criminal activities. So as a deterrence to that, you know, someone convicted of industrial waste duty offences twice in 5 years can face up to 2 years jail now. So that is, you know, that is a signal that we are taking that waste crime very seriously. And people engaging in waste crime and knowingly doing the wrong thing can certainly face much bigger penalties than they were, you know, even a year ago. So next time you're completing a job and you want to dispose of some waste, make sure check where it's going and whether that place is lawful. It's your responsibility to check on these things. I think we've heard a lot about planning ahead in the different presentations today, and making sure you set yourself up for compliance. This is no different. I think this is, you know, simple steps you can take around quotes, around receipts, and just following up, asking the questions, and expecting a little bit more of your waste provider in terms of information about what they're saying they're going to do with the waste. And also just make sure you're classifying, not hiding different chemicals and things into your waste. Separate it the best you can. Make sure it's clear. If there are any risks with the waste, any asbestos, it's properly managed. It's getting to the landfill. Just make sure you're thinking about those different components in your waste. That's the end of my presentation. So thanks for your attention. Make sure that you put any other questions in the Slido. I see it's just come up. It isn't difficult. Make sure your waste gets to the right place and it's not ending up somewhere where we'll find it dumped somewhere it shouldn't be. Back to you, Donna.
Thanks, Mark. We'll now move to question time. For those who aren't familiar with Slido, please open the URL displayed on the screen in a web browser and use the team code that is up on the screen right now. Once you're in it, you can submit any questions to any of the regulators and we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can. Well, the first question that we have up is, WorkSafe, is there a specific priority harm we need to focus on above everything else? Would you be able to answer that, Brian?
I should be able to answer that, Donna, I think. Look, I think with these priority harms, and if we look at a specific thing, I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 main things that causes fatalities in construction, but number one obviously is falls, and I think it's just an obvious thing. when we look at, I think there was a 2-year period there where we got some stats on falls and what was notified through to WorkSafe. It was in a 2-year period, 367 odd falls notified through. So basically every second day over a 2-year period, 6 fatalities. And one of the key facts, I guess, with those, over, I think 280 of them were from heights less than 4 metres. So, you know, the type of work we're doing, as I said earlier, the selection of the fall control, the ladder that we're using, you know, just because we're only working on a single story roof, doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have to put any fall control in place, that we're right. You know, it's just one of those things. Just look at what it is you're doing. Take that 5 seconds just to look back and say, right, is there something else that I can do? Should I move the ladder, you know, 500 mil to the left, or so that I can reach rather than reaching over? You know, is access up onto the roof. It could be when we're getting down. You know, 3 points of contact, all those types of things when we climb the ladders, when we're accessing roofs, scaffolding, making sure that it's complete, doing your checks. I know there's been incidents where, you know, safety walks have been done, scaffolds are complete, something's gone pear-shaped, do we go back and someone's altered it? There are so many different things that can happen when we're working at heights. And who's doing the task? Are they actually confident in what they're doing as well? And I think that's, you know, it's a focus for us, always is. And I think it's just one of the obvious things that I think a lot of times we just take for granted and overlook because we're obviously always working, trying to get that job done. But you know, I guess that's a specific one. It's front of mind for all of us, should be there all the time, but I guess the others as well. You know, as I said, the structural collapse, the electricity, and the mobile plan as well. Hopefully that answers the question, Donna.
Thank you. Next one's for Mark. Question for the EPA. There are lots of different codes and types of waste. How can I go about classifying the waste when I have lots of different types?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I touched on this a bit in the presentation, but this will allow me to expand. So I mentioned, and you would have seen, obviously, you're talking about the code, so you've seen the big list. I guess what's important about this, they're what you call pre-classified waste. And what's important about those is that against each code, there is a tick or a yes against whether it's industrial priority or reportable priority. The reason that's important is that is really going to dictate the type of management you need to undertake. So if it's reportable priority waste, like asbestos, for example, you need to track and have the different and have the vehicle permissions as well. If it is industrial, you don't need to track. You need to think more about the endpoint. So when you have a big load of mixed waste, and I'll just hazard a guess here that you've got things like bricks, timber, plastics, metals, all of those things we list and pre-classify as industrial waste. So think about each item. Where possible, there are different, I know there are different job site waste managers that separate some of this waste and find different recycling places to go to, and they manage it for you. But if you're just putting it, say, into the skip bin, which is fairly common, and it's going to somewhere else to be sorted and then managed after that, just check that all of those items that, you know, generally the most hazardous item in that can be accepted by the skip bin operators, either the headquarters that they take it back to where they separate, or the depots rather, or if they're taking it to a landfill, that the landfill can accept it. The easiest thing to do is just, like I said, think about the most hazardous part of that waste. So if you've got chemicals, if you've got asbestos, if you've got other items going in there that you think, batteries or anything you think might be a bit hazardous, try and separate those and think about where they're going. And if it's just general bricks, timber, concrete, look at if they're all industrial, just check that the permission covers those things. Remember, if it is the higher order, you do need the license site if it is the reportable priority waste. So that's just something to look for. But again, you can come back to EPA, so contact at EPA or 1-800 EPA Vic to get further advice if you've got something tricky. But yeah, best way is to think about the individual components, think about whether they're all industrial waste or whether they need specific types of handling, and just check where they're going to. What are they doing with it? Are they sending it straight to landfill? Are they sorting and separating at another depot? And is that licensed to undertake that activity?
Thank you. The next question is to WorkSafe. Vested interest here, but no mention of the OHS Essentials program to assist some of the businesses.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Like that's a okay sort of I guess a question or a comment. I mean, we sort of when we're out on site, we're always talking to duty holders and myself as a presenter going around presenting to plumbing licensing groups, builders registration groups, which we do a lot of through this Build Aware program and night courses once I get up into Bendigo and in the TAFE system. And we're always talking about that Safety Essentials program through there. So I know our inspectors, when they're out on site, will always promote that Safety Essentials program. But as far as this sort of, I guess this webinar and this forum here goes, it was more about the Build Aware and what our I suppose strategy was, and to get that message across first. So no problems there. We're always out there looking for getting duty holders more information wherever we possibly can. So no drama there.
Thanks, Brian. I'll probably let you respond to the next one as well. Will you be going to other regions across Victoria?
Yes, we will. Next week, obviously, Build Aware is Bendigo based. I think a couple of weeks after that, we run what we call a cross-border program as well, where we were up on the obviously the New South Wales Victoria border, and we'll be up in the Albury-Wodonga area, and we work both sides of the border there. So WorkSafe, obviously from that strategy program, we look at where we go, where we need to go, where we need to focus throughout regional Victoria, and we will be going around to different areas where we are going. We sort of plan out where we go. That may change along the way depending on obviously what happens, but we do go to other regions across Victoria for sure.
Great. And the next one I'll probably ask Alex or Glenn for the best response. Roofing. Can you advise what material is appropriate to isolate a box gutter from a yellow tongue ply support base?
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I can talk about that. I can't be specific about a particular material or recommend a material, but certainly something with examples we've seen have been through painting. Certain paint types could be compatible, as well as materials, as long as they're, as I said earlier, if they're non-abrasive, they're impervious and non-conducting. So something that's not going to allow, sort of any sort of sweating between the two materials. The yellow tongue is referenced there, or the box gutter, so that to cause that moisture between the two, which will then draw out that chemical in the timber and start corroding the metal. So hopefully that answers that.
Thank you. And the next one is also for the VBA. What are the penalties and consequences for builders who do not follow regulations concerning wet areas, roof plumbing, fire separation, etc.? Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Donna. So in relation to that, and specifically with the proactive inspection program, we generally send out risk letters to builders if there is risks found relating to wet areas, roof plumbing and fire separation. That can, ideally, that can lead to the relevant building surveyor issuing a building notice, building order minor work, or generally it's directions to fix while it's during construction to get that work rectified. If there is no action there, the VBA can step in and issue a directions to fix as well. And those, I guess, enforcement action tools that they also have penalty units that go with that as well. So if directions to fix isn't complied with, there is penalty units that sort of is attached to that, that would go against the builder, and that can be referred to the VBA if a DTF isn't complied with, and that would be the consequences, basically leading back to that question. That's how where the consequences come in. If a DTF isn't complied with, it gets referred to the VBA.
Thanks, Alex. And the next one for Barry from Energy Safe. Is there a minimum separation distance depth that you can dig near an electrical pole infrastructure concern around pole integrity?
Yeah, hi Donna. Yes, there is. I'm just trying to get the camera working, so sorry if I can't get that up just at the moment. But you can hear me okay? Can you hear me, Donna?
Yeah, all good, Barry. Thank you.
Okay.
And I can see you as well.
Oh, perfect. Yes, there is. So the question, is there a minimum distance? Yes, there is a, sorry, Dave's just. So yes, there is a minimum distance. Excavation near poles and wires and structures, there's no excavation is permitted deeper than 900 mils when in 1500, 1.5 metres of the pole or where stay wires are entered in the ground. So where that pole infrastructure is there and anything attached to it, and there's no excavation deeper than 1.8 or 1800 mils within 3 metres of a pole or support. And for any excavation with the exclusion zone, permission from the power company is required. So if you're going to come under those distances, you need to contact the asset owner, and that may be an AusNet or a power call. So they're the distances that you can come around electrical infrastructure, poles and wires. I'm not talking about the underground assets in the ground. I'm actually talking, that's specific to the question. I'm actually talking about the poles and how and the integrity of the of that pole. So just to repeat, so no deeper than 900 within 1.5 and no excavation deeper than 1.8 within 3 metres of a support structure. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks, Barry. And the next one from Mark from the EPA. For artefacts and archaeological remnants discovered in excavation, who's the authority and what are the responsibilities?
Yeah, so EPA doesn't look after the historical remnants. I'm assuming we're talking about heritage issues here, but I did just look it up. It looks like the Heritage Council of Victoria would be the people to contact first, or local government, I guess, if there are planning overlays and so on that are involved.
Oh, thanks for taking the time to look it up, Mark. The next one's for WorkSafe. So we go back to Brian. Who is responsible for deciding what controls are put in place in a trench? And what happens if there's a difference of opinion with WorkSafe?
I like the second part of that question. It's a good one, isn't it, Donna? By an inspector yourself, you'd probably chuckle at that one. Look, who is responsible for deciding what controls are put in place? Obviously, the duty holder, the person that is in control of the trench, is the one that ultimately has the responsibility. At the end of the day, it is that person who is in charge of that works or has management and control of that works to make sure that the risk is controlled. And how they do that, obviously, they need to know what the risks are. They need to know what sort of things need to be put in place. And we're talking about trenching works. We've got to look at depth of trench. We've got to look at soil conditions. We've got to look at the type of works that's been undertaken in the trench. We've got to look at the type of work's been taken around the trench. We've got to look at, the procedures for rescues and can they be implemented. There's a whole heap of things that come into play to say, and this is one of the key things with trenching works and, even a lot of the hazards that we see, even falls. Not every job is going to be exactly the same. So the same controls may not be appropriate for each job. So you have to take each job individually and look at the risks involved in it. As far as looking at how you can control some of those risks, things like the compliance code for excavation. I was looking around, I don't have one here, I was going to flash it up on the screen, but a compliance code for excavation goes through, and that is what, is basically deemed to comply. Go through that. That will talk about some of the things that can be implemented. When it comes to a difference of opinion, obviously that happens quite a bit. At the end of the day, a WorkSafe inspector is going to look at the risk. We're not going to look at we're going to look at the controls that are in place, and if we still see that there's a risk and we still believe that there's a risk, then a WorkSafe inspector, difference of opinion, may issue a notice. That could either be an improvement notice to, where there is a risk, but it needs to be, or there are some controls in place, but they're not quite appropriate. So an improvement notice then to upscale or make improvements on the controls that are in place. Or it could be a prohibition notice, which basically means the inspector believes that there's an immediate risk and he's going to, prohibit any further works until such time as the appropriate controls are in place. So most of the time, if there's a difference of opinion with a WorkSafe inspector, it's about coming to some sort of, appropriate solution where we can. Ultimately, if there is a difference of opinion on a WorkSafe inspector, then we have our powers and we will use our powers to make sure that the highest level of control is implemented. And that's the way we'll go about it. So back to you, Donna. I hope.
Yep, thanks. Thanks, Brian. The next couple over to Alex for the VBA. Roof plumbing certificate has performance solution ticketed, and VBA proactive states roof drainage is non-compliant. What does the BS builder do?
Thanks, Donna. I'm not sure if Glenn can answer this, but my understanding would be if there is a roof plumbing certificate that the VBA can audit that certificate as well to look into how it was accepted. But if there is a difference between the performance solution or the roof plumbing certificate saying there's a performance solution, and on the other hand, it's saying it's non-compliant, I believe it would come back to the building surveyor as well to accept that. But I'll probably quickly pass over to Glenn as well to see if he has more on that.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Just as Alex explained earlier in the presentation, proactive inspections is conducted prior to any sort of roof or any sort of plumbing certificates of compliances being lodged. So at the time of inspection, if the items of risk have been identified and the letter of risk is generally sent to the builder to address, and the building surveyor in most cases as well, for them to address that item of risk with the relevant trade that's in this case obviously roof plumbing. So if a performance solution has been created for that, it would be requested to be provided as part of that letter response, and then it shouldn't get to the stage where a plumbing certificate of compliance is lodged without us signing off to say that yes, that performance solution satisfies. Once, as Alex said, if it does get to a point where a practitioner chooses to lodge the certificate of compliance before addressing the issue, then we can escalate that to audits, and we can do a plumbing audit on that where a notice of rectification would be issued to address the item. And again, as Alex also touched on before, the building surveyor, can sort of, put a different methods of addressing what's required as part of that letter of risk, either before issuing the OP or not. So yeah, so as I say, part of the letter of risk should identify that issue, and it should be addressed before a certificate of compliance is lodged. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. The next one also related to the VBA. How do we manage non-registered trades? Example, ongoing illegal works or non-compliant issues. Can we report them to the VBA?
Yeah, look, absolutely, and we would encourage that. We do encourage that. It's unfortunate, it does happen. Particularly we do come across it occasionally in proactives, and it does need to be addressed. And we would encourage anyone that does identify that to report it through the VBA, lodging it through the VBA website.
I'll just add to that, Glenn. In relation to illegal work, so if there's work carried out without a building permit, which is a Section 16 offence under the Building Act, it can be reported to the local council, who the municipal building surveyor can issue a building notice for illegal building work as well. So that's generally where illegal building work gets referred to, is the local council.
Thanks, Alex. The next one, back to WorkSafe. Given COVID, is it acceptable to have site induction and SWIMs implemented with subcontractors online?
Yeah. Thanks, Donna. Just before I do go on, just on that last comment or question I answered too, just on the difference of opinion too, I forgot to mention too that if their duty holder's not happy with the decision that WorkSafe make, they do have a process they can go through, which is our internal review process too. So there is an avenue they can take up, which the inspector should explain it when he's issuing the notices as well. With the given COVID, is it acceptable to have site inductions and SWIMs implemented with subcontractors online? look, obviously the obligation to make sure that people are inducted and obviously swims are implemented properly. With COVID, yeah, they've been done online. I think things are opening up a little bit more now as we sort of come out and get back to normal. So, face to face is obviously a better solution. Inductions, well, there's a lot of different ways people do inductions. It's about making sure that they do get the right information and that they are, I guess, understanding what sort of site rules and things need to be implemented. When it comes to the swims, we see a lot of different ways swims are implemented and a lot of different types of swims. Our regulations say that swims need to be accessible, readily accessible, and also comprehensible to the person that's using them. So that's probably the key there. They all say that, so that means that they need to be there, they need to be on site, they need to be able on site, they need to be able to be. If a WorkSafe inspector was to come on site, ask for a swims, and they need to be readily accessible. So in other words, somebody has to or should really have one. However they're done, when they're done online, done on an iPad, done on a phone, whatever, they should be there. They should be able to grab that swims, be able to show that inspector that swims. And then they also should be able to understand it. So the key questions, I guess, are, from my point of view, from a WorkSafe point of view, is if I are talking to someone that has been inducted or has been inducted into a swims, even if it is online, I should still be able to ask them questions about those swims and those induction processes, and they should be able to answer those questions. So that's the key to being inducted properly.
Thanks, Brian. I think the next one might be VBA. How can building designers better facilitate for workers' safety as part of their safety and design protocols? Alex, would you be able to respond to that?
I'm not sure if that's actually a VBA one or whether it's
Yeah.
safe or something, or what the question is alluding to, that one, unfortunately.
Okay,
I might be
well, we
able to
might
help
put
a little
Brian.
bit with that one, Donna, if you
Thanks,
like.
Brian.
Yeah, sorry. I guess, how can building designers better facilitate? Section 28 of the OH&S Act covers off on safe design of building. Unfortunately, it doesn't cover off on domestic premises, so it doesn't do domestic builds. When it comes to, say, a commercial build or a high-rise build, what it does do is it starts to talk about the end user. So if that building is going to be used as a workplace down the track, then we start to look at some of the designs that can be put in place to keep people safe in their jobs. That could include things like access to roof areas where it could be, air conditioning units, heaters, so forth, may be placed on a roof. Is there access to the roof, permanent access, ladder access, ladder points, gantry walkways on roofs, those type of things. It could also be noise reduction in places if it was it might be a factory and you've got, a lot of noisy equipment that's going to be out in that factory, and you've got an office space. So is it, double glazing or something along those lines that can protect people that are in there as a workplace in the office from the noise from the factory. It could also be design of traffic flow and things like that through car parks and so forth. So that's sort of how that works. So yeah, Section 28 does cover off on safe design, but as I said, it doesn't cover off on domestic premises.
Thank you. The next one for Mark from the VBA. As a follow-up to the unregistered trades Q&A, what is the time frame for registration and licensing of trades, especially when it's being introduced?
I'll answer that. There is work going around the carpentry registration. I'm not too sure of the time frame, but if there is a way that we can get back to Russell after this, we'll reach out and sort of, if I can dig deeper and find that actual time frame, I'll get back to you and send something out.
Thank you. The next one's for Mark. What do I do if the waste company picking up my waste gives me information on what's going to happen to it? How do I know?
Yeah, look, and I just want to point out that, of course, the obligations on producers are to take all reasonable steps. A lot of those steps I've outlined. There's also good guidance on our website. But what to do on the ground? Look, I've been pretty clear, I guess, when talking to a lot of the waste companies in setting up this legislation that, you know, you are going to need to provide information to your customers, particularly through quotes. I think it's probably a good place to start. But we are only 9 months into the legislation and things don't happen straight away. So yeah, noting that, I would continue to ask questions. If you're not getting that information, sometimes the driver picking it up might not necessarily have that because they're doing the same thing over and over, but they should also know. So you can ask the driver as well. But if you're not feeling comfortable about it and you think there's something wrong with it, just don't use that particular company. If you're feeling like you're not getting the answers, you're not satisfied, look it up on the EPA website, see what you can find out about whether they've got a permission somewhere in the system. But I think more and more, when you set up that quote, it's probably the time to ask where the waste is going and what they're doing with it. And I think we'll see that improve over the coming years, and we're certainly hoping that will. So far as EPA goes, you know, if an authorised officer finds your waste in a vacant lot somewhere, it is going to come down to you to outline the steps you took to check that was going to happen. So they can tell you they're doing something with the waste. They can demonstrate all the best processes in the world. Doesn't mean that they will do that, but what's important is that you've checked and you've done what you can to verify it. Receipts. Follow up is another good way afterwards. If you're feeling a bit uncomfortable, check your receipts. Insist that your receipts need to have more detail on them, or that they're telling you what actually happened. So yeah, just simple steps. As I'd say, look at the quotes, look at your receipts. If you're feeling uncomfortable about it, call EPA. Don't pass the waste on if you really feel like it's going to be dumped.
Thank you. The next one relates to the Build Aware campaign.
I can answer that if you want, Donna.
Thank you. When you come out to site, will you be coming out together? Having 4+ inspectors could be very intimidating.
The answer is, when we come out to site, yes, there might be the odd occasion that there might be more than 4+ inspectors. The intent is with the Build Aware program that we will team up early in the mornings to help each other, like 1 or 2 sites, and work together, and then probably go our own separate ways. So that might mean in ESV's case, well, we'll team up with WorkSafe, maybe Brian and myself, or someone, or the WorkSafe operators out of Bendigo, and then we may team up for 1 or 2 early site visits, and then go our own way. And typically, some of the regulators at the tenure site will be working singularly, others may be working in pairs. For Energy Safe Victoria, it'll be probably Dave and myself. So the direct answer to your question, there could be more than 4 in some occasions, but most times it'll be just pairs or singular. So, but in that respect, if you just take it that I understand that it can be very intimidating. If you look at it, our primary objective in this program is to educate. So Build Aware campaign is all about education, safety education and compliance. Obviously, if there's a direct safety issue that's obvious to any of the regulators, that will be addressed. However, the overarching concept is to educate. So take it as a view that we're there to assist and provide information and educate. And that's the overarching concept. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks, Barry. I'm just mindful of the time. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the questions. We're so sorry we couldn't answer everything that has come through. We will be sending out an email with links from the speakers' presentations after this webinar. Please refer to this slide if you have any specific questions and you need to contact a specific regulator. Additionally, we've popped a link into our post-event survey into the chat box, and this will also be supplied in the email to you after this webinar. Please click on this and let us know how you liked the webinar and anything that we could be improved for the next time. Thank you.